Hey folks, welcome back. If you've been around recently, you'll see that I have been doing some live videos and trying to get back into things. And as I reflect on my practice, how August went, just where I'm at the moment, I came to a bit of a conclusion about my seasonal deck practice that I'm trying out this year. And I thought that I would come on, tell you a bit about it and do the new update. What I've realised is that not all of the 13 decks that I've selected tend to get used, especially not in the summer edit, which is not a problem. 13 is a significant amount even over the course of 3 months, in my humble opinion. But of course I've got quite a large collection, and it's really been an interesting practice of seeing where I'm at with the collection as a working collection, seeing what that looks like now that I can't necessarily rotate all of them within a year, how I feel about that, what I'm keeping, what I'm not, how I want to move forward. It's only midway through that process, so I don't have any definitive answers. I have parted with a fair selection of decks. I don't know, on average maybe about 15, but I also got a fair amount in around my birthday, as you may or may not have seen if you watched that live. And the lives are available for you to watch back if you would like to. It's just, unless they're coming up in your subscription feed, if you go onto my actual channel, you have to click the live section to see those ones for some reason. So the summer edit didn't really go to plan. Some of my newer decks came in a little bit earlier, along with just a couple of general gifts from friends, and that kind of changed a few of the decks that I was working with. I was going to reflect on it, and then I thought, oh, too many deck videos at once. So given that it's been pretty deck heavy over here as it is, and I wanted to do this, we are skirting over that video. But yeah, in honesty, I think my summer edit was possibly the least successful, but I honestly feel like that's reflective of summer kind of being high energy in terms of the way I experience it externally, but me getting to a kind of a low energy burnout point at the same time. And a lot of other things going on with health and other people's birthdays, because Leo season is a busy one for me, folks. Lifing and all of the things, and my practice does ebb and flow with the seasons, so it is kind of common for a lot of the tool-based stuff to slow down and a lot more of the energetic, connective, outdoors stuff to sort of take its place, even if that just means me being in the garden. Then something that took me by surprise was I really started to feel the transitionary process of the seasons internally quite a bit sooner than I usually do. I certainly don't consider it the end of summer, even though it's the 3rd of September today when I'm recording this, just in case it takes me a few days to get it up. This very much feels like summer to me still. I do tend to like the influence of the Wheel of the Year just as kind of a mental date, but it's no secret to anyone that I practice the seasonal tides in more of a land and region based capacity. So whilst I do definitely celebrate the Wheel of the Year on the day if I am able, it's more of like a nice marking point and celebration for me. It doesn't really represent the way that I work with it as a whole. It's more just a moment for celebration, reflection, ritual, and I'll usually try and do that in and around sort of 3 days before or after that sort of point on the Wheel of the Year. It often doesn't feel very autumnal to me until the seasons really started kicking in with the transition, and where I live there's not really anything of the sort. I think the major change has been that it's raining again a little bit more. That's kind of normal for England. Rain meets humidity, which I loathe high humidity, so probably in the wrong country for that. But it's otherwise very sunny. And in terms of the plants and the animals, really not too much has slowed down. It's really just cusping on that early transition. And of course, we're going to see a lot more changes with things like that, unfortunately, because of climate change anyway. All of that said, internally, I am feeling the transition in a bigger way. I potentially have some stuff coming up in the physical material realm, and very tangibly will be a transition in and of itself. And I just realised that I wanted to refresh my deck selection, but I'm having a little clean around of my altar space. I'm not really changing anything at the moment. There's reasons, but I don't want to share them yet. A lot of my collection feels very autumnal aesthetically, so that doesn't really matter, but I'm very much an autumnal aesthetic girly. I like the grungy, I like the macabre, I suppose the darker half of the year, which is interesting because I don't enjoy winter as a season, but certainly the themes that run between autumn and winter tend to show up in a lot of my tools, I feel, if I was going to assign them to those things. And there's a lot of decks that I get excited about in and around Halloween in particular, because that is part of the joy of my deck collection. So in honour of this kind of sensation of late summer, early fall transition, the plethora of new decks that I got in and wanting to spend some time connecting to those, and being aware that when it comes to sort of mid-autumn, mid-fall, I will probably want to do another seasonal deck shuffle and go for the other ones that I had in mind, because working with 13 is already too many and I'm okay with what doesn't get worked with. It's not really about that. These are the focal points, the key options, not including my Animal in Tarot series and my Animal Gnosis over on Patreon. But yeah, coming back to my point, because this is getting to be a very long intro, I didn't really want to do twice the amount. Incredibly overwhelming, not for me. And by the point that I feel that autumn's really in its full stride, I'd like to come back and reevaluate and see if any stay as well, and change some out, because my autumn, more Halloween-y edit will definitely have my vampire decks in it. It always does. Thank you for listening. I know that if you were watching this, you were probably just here for the deck discussion. However, I really wanted to share that insight into my practice and just a bit of a preamble about why I've actually split this season into two, as it were. And I imagine that I'll work with this edit for at least a month and a half, I guess. Maybe a month, I really don't know. And then come back and review it sort of early to mid-October. So let's get into the decks. As I say, I have 13. That naturally happened the first time and I've just stuck with it because fun witchy number, just playful, that's it. Here we've got the Little Pigeon Tarot, which was my main birthday present from my parents. And here is the Earthbound Oracle mixed in with the Seeker's Lenormand, and I use the whole thing as an oracle deck. Now, of course, I haven't used these two together at all. I say, of course, I've only had this for like 4 or 5 days. I just had a little look at them together as I was working in sort of pairing mindset, because I do like to pair commonly, and I don't have to, but then the option's always there. The Pigeon Tarot is very likely going to become a staple for the emotive reasons that this deck has been bought for me and what pigeons mean to me and my stepmum, and just general associations with them, experiences with them and stuff. And it's very unusual for me to say that about a deck before I've used it, but honestly, it's just a thing, and I won't bore you with that information. If you want to hear me talk about it more, head over to my recent birthday goodies live. And if you just want to see me talk about this one, you can always sort of scroll through and find that point. But because it has that whole city pigeon vibe going on, I felt like the Earthbound and Seekers, which essentially is just an expanded Earthbound oracle to me, I felt like they really complemented each other. Visually, this is quite spacious, but I feel like they're the sort of foods and knickknacks and interesting items that birds like city birds of any variety find in and around the city, you know, when people have trashed them or whatever it is. And there's this really interesting meeting of actual items, you know, human-made, human-created items, as well as like naturally occurring foods and plants and other animals. So the crossover of these just felt really complementary for me. There's not too much going on. How would I describe these? Because this one isn't quite vintage, but I've got a lot of decks, which you're going to see actually today. A lot of these neutrally coloured, either vintage or antiquated or spacious vibe decks. And I find that they work with a lot of my busier or more colourful stuff. They're quite complementary to a lot of things. There are, of course, a few obscure layers to this, but generally speaking, I don't know, they just feel like a meant to be pairing as far as I'm concerned. And I'm really excited to use them together. I am definitely going to do a reading with them as soon as I finish this video. So yeah, that was kind of my thinking on this. I love Six of Swords and Vision. That's a really interesting one, especially because they clearly can see where they're going, but here is sort of speaking about vision in a different capacity, not such a obvious what we see is what we envision, but actually our mind's eye and what we're communicating to ourselves about that movement and about the coming together of something. There are my first two decks, and I can see them probably being quite dominant ones throughout. We shall see. Next up, you'll recognise these two from my summer edit. These were incredibly successful and I'm not ready to part with them, and they do feel very late summer transition, especially the Antique Anatomy Ephemera, which sort of balances out the very summery feeling Flower Oracle. I have loved these two together, which always surprises me because I suppose one of the standout things here for me, just on a very aesthetic level, is that they don't look anything like each other, and then you've got quite white borders on this Oracle deck. The flowers, they just really pull everything together, and I find that because this is quite a spacious deck, as I said, a lot of my ones like this tend to be, and not just because they're all by the same creator, although there is that in a few of them. But it sort of makes up for the busier artwork. And I probably said before as well, I really like the colour play between these two, so I find that more often than not, colour tends to be a theme, something that I'll notice between them, especially if there is some sort of repetition and cohesion between 2, 3 or more of the cards. So yeah, I find that really interesting. I am enjoying kind of pippish decks at the moment, tarot wise, or Rider-Waite-Smith ones, which is somewhat unusual for me. I do have one that's definitely not that way inclined, but for the most part, yeah, I'm just feeling a little bit more like that. I read very intricatively anyway, so it's not too definitive of the way that I'm reading, but they just kind of seem to be the things that I'm going for. Like I said, not too much else to say about these two because you've seen them, so let's move on. Next up, we have my, again, newly received pre-order of the Heartwood Tarot, and then paired up with the Thistledown, which was a pre-order, last year? So they finally get to hang out with each other. I have taken some cards out of this one to even the stacks out. If anyone's ever wondering, most of these stacks aren't perfect. That's just something I do that gets edited out. With this one, I've chosen my Lovers cards, and I also took all of the Oracle cards out, barring this one, which is why it's on the top. I am so absolutely infatuated with this card. Snails are very dear to me anyway. I love the inclusion of Tend, and it's such a chunky deck that I generally don't want to have to stretch my hands any further, but feel like 79 cards I can deal with. I'm kind of used to that. Creators tend to put something fun in. I will find a way to use the other ones or incorporate them sometimes, but while I'm getting to know it, that's what I've chosen to do. And I didn't actually think that I would use these two together, which probably seems odd to some people, just because I wondered if it would just be too much of the same. But I think the size difference between the two different fonts, there's obviously the dragons in these as well. I'm saying obviously, you might not know that. Whereas as far as I recall, because I have been through this entirely on that live as well, there's no fantasy animals in this one. But I've already found the meeting of the two of them to just be exquisite. They clearly were made to complement each other, and it has worked absolutely beautifully. With this one, I have indeed kept the 𝗖𝘁𝗁 card and the other two nameless cards in it. I think they intended the other two nameless cards to be yes and no. I sort of have more of a stretchy way of working with them. I don't know how to explain that any better. Sometimes they feel more yes and no. Sometimes I do more of an as above, so below, or more of an association as to what I associate with nighttime and daytime. They just work really well for all of those things, to be quite honest. So it's just intuitively as and when. But aren't they adorable together? There's something very soft about the artwork in the Heartwood, and the Thistledown, the lines are slightly crisper. I'm really wondering if that comes through on this. And I think, again, rather than feeling like there's something that doesn't match about that, it just gives them just a little bit of a different essence, and it's subtle. In some of the cards it's more noticeable in others. Sometimes I think it's just the style of line work. Like I say, I'm not sure if it's coming through, but it's, yeah. I'm actually enjoying the two of them together, which was a pleasant surprise because I thought I'd be pairing them predominantly with other decks. I will pair across decks in this 13 card selection, but this makes it quicker to show you, and these are my first choice pairings. Now, I just wanted to stop on these two because not only do the keywords feel really beautiful together, but also look at the directions, look at where the light is hitting. We've actually got a compass here, guidance. It feels like a really affirmative reading. In particular, if you was to pull these two, I'm really enjoying how they are mirroring each other, I suppose, in this instance. I think that's what I find very affirmative. There's definitely like a progression, like move towards what it is that you have felt is guiding you. And I think in this instance, had I have been doing more of a general reading, I might then take that point, check in with the spirits that I work with and anything that I've got going on that I might specifically want to tap into more specificity around in terms of guidance, and then add to this reading. So still with the same decks, but start expanding upon the discussion of, okay, well, I can see that I'm heading in the right direction. I'm really curious if this is about this area of my life, or I'm really curious about if I do this, what the progression will continue to look like moving forward potentially, or how can I aid myself as I'm guided towards this spot to ensure that I don't burn out, especially with the wands. And as someone who's been talking about burnout a lot recently, that feels very relevant. So yeah, I just wanted to stop on those two before we move on to the next decks. Next we move on to the Witch Sisters Tarot, and I actually count these as one deck again because it's the only way that I use them. So very similar to the Earthbound and Seekers. If you're thinking, hey, you said 13 decks and this is adding up, I genuinely don't separate them ever. They are just integrated into each other, and that is that. So this is more based on how I use things, because it seems silly to call it two decks when it just doesn't exist that way. But for the purposes of anyone looking for this, this is two decks, and it is the Hedgewitch Botanical Oracle and the Winterseer Animal Oracle. Sorry, those names always feel like a little bit of a mouthful for me. This does feel wintry, not because it's called the Winterseer, but because It's so very, very white and stark, and the spaciousness feels a little bit less homely. I don't suppose that's right. I really feel connected to the plants and the animals, but it's just not as warm, you know, for me. The colours help. It's more the animals and the flowers bring me back over the visual, if that makes sense. They bring me back to really whenever it is that I want to work with them in the year. So I will be honest and say that this oracle, I would struggle to pick a season for it as a whole or individually based on that, but it's more to do with the Witch Sister Tarot. Now, some of these decks, I'm not necessarily assigning a season to them and saying it's the only season. I think this overall feels quite autumnal to me, but it feels like a very transitional deck, and I would place it at any transition, but two of the ones that it really spoke to, you know, for me personally, is that of the transition from summer to autumn, and also I feel like autumn to winter, although I haven't had that transition with this deck yet. But there's just something about those two, and the animals and botanicals work beautifully with this deck. I absolutely love these two together. It's got a really great selection of keywords. Again, sometimes we get the colour coming in with some of them, which infuses it. This is not a 𝗪𝗏𝗺𝗃 deck, mostly by any stretch of the imagination. Oh, look at these two. Beautiful. I feel like this is very ritualistic for me, and it is very witchy, and whilst I'm not Scottish, I'm English, there is a lot of familiarity in there for me for varying reasons, some more obvious than others. Because of the ritualistic nature, because of the reason that I work with it being very reflective of looking at my relationship with my practice, and some of the deity that I work with, some of my spirit inquiry, as well as some more sort of general readings, but there is a really big facet to that one. These ones then complement that really well, because animals are inherently like an everyday part of my practice more than anything else, and I absolutely adore plants, but was struggling to find a plant deck that really fit for me, and honestly have parted with several over the years, only to really fall in love with this one and be really glad to mix it in with the animals. It feels like they complement each other in that capacity. So I find that to be just yummy. I know that's a silly word, but it feels good. It's like a nourishing warm meal as the season turns and it gets cooler. These two are really sweet together. So we've got a sage here which says purify, which is interesting because I have to say, I think my relationship with the word more purity, this sort of takes the edge off for me, but over the years of being in and around spiritual communities, especially when I was younger, the concept of purity and the way it was discussed always gave me the ick, and it was very much the undertones of that, not the relationship that sage has and why this has been chosen for that. So I really like stepping away from that and getting back to the roots of what purify can mean, away from some of the really gross whitewashed spirituality and feminism that just doesn't serve anyone except maybe a minor few. And is it really serving them if it's not offering community and inclusivity? I feel like they're probably missing out too. But without going on a tangent, I really love this idea of that with renewal. And whilst I am totally okay with the original tarot names, I do like the concept of renewal for judgment, because I feel like there's a whole extra portion to that exists that sometimes that particular imagery doesn't really speak to. So there's something about the coming back to something and the, like I said, the renewal and the refreshing sensation of the two of these that are really speaking to me. So perhaps they're a really lovely one to stop on, because we will just fall into weird story time otherwise. Next up, we've got my very new 5-cent tarot. This is the second edition, because I think the coloration's different on the front as well as the first. I'm just basing that on the fact that I watched 𝗂𝗂𝗍𝒻's video. She actually included this in hers as well, which was really lovely hearing someone else talk about their existing relationship with this. It's been on my wish list for the longest time. So 5-cent tarot, and here we have my beloved Memento Mori oracle. Now, this is probably interchangeable with the oracle I'm going to show with the next deck, and vice versa, but I had to pick one for each, and I feel like this probably makes the most sense for this one based on the next two that I'm going to share. Again, haven't used these two together. The 5-cent came probably within the last week, and of course then that's one. Ending and Crossroads. Sorry, I got completely distracted, but I do love it when a pairing catches my eye. And the concept of the black and white and the up and down and that eternal concept of cycles really comes into this. I can never remember what these are actually called other than timers. They're like really vintage sand timers, right? But we've got the affinity symbol, and you can see it's on a spinner, so it can just be a continuous process from one ending and the building of something to the next. And so that in itself, really, before I even think about the actual title, symbol, what these mean beyond that, the imagery really struck me. And so that's why I got distracted. I don't even remember what I was going to say, other than, of course, I haven't worked with this because I've had it for less than a week. And I've been absolutely just working full speed ahead because I was a little bit behind on my Patreon. Absolutely exhausted myself, which is why I was meant to be having a rest today, but this is pretty chill and short enough. I am very familiar with the Memento. To be very honest, even when it's not in my edits, it's in use. And the reason that I wanted to include it in the edit is because it takes up a deck space and it does feel seasonally appropriate. Again, there's a lot of transition, liminality, ritual and stuff just absolutely baked into that deck and my relationship with it. Yeah, this is obviously my vibe aesthetically, so you can see why this fell into the fold. These are those kind of decks where they just tend to be ones that I get on with very well. Aesthetics aren't everything, but actually that relationship with the artwork, I guess the zings and the messages I get from the visual do matter a lot. I like the inclusions in this one, the animals, again, the ephemera. It makes a lot of sense for my practice at the moment and how it's been historically for quite some time. So as it stands, I feel like this is going to be quite a solid deck in my practice. We'll see. I've got a good feeling about it. Oh, and that's the other thing. Speaking of keeping cards in and taking cards out, 4 extras come with this. I spoke about it again in that live. This is an extra, the Beyond and the Messenger, because I left that one in there as well, which I know it wasn't with this one, but the Door Knocker for me is a card that I associate with my granddad in particular as well. So it is kind of like a spirit card in another layer, as well as how I would perceive the Door Knocker. So if these two came up together, that would be a very clear message. But all of this is to say, of the 4 cards, they're really beautiful and they do have nuances and they have been thought about, but for me they started to feel a little bit repetitive of cards that already exist in the major arcana. I just didn't feel like I needed them in there. I love Messenger, not that I need it, but I did feel like it would be pertinent to keep it in there, and I decided to keep the Beyond in for the time being. One, because I freaking love the visual. I did like the concept of the Beyond being more liminal. Now, whether that will play out in practice or not is another thing. I genuinely can't tell you, but for the time being, those are the 2 of the 4 that I decided to keep in because I think I can make sense of them. Knife, in terms of the Hanged Man, feels very fitting. And if I'm really honest, the first thing that came into my head, obviously honouring where I'm at the moment, was this concept of sort of like a knife in the back and cutting words. and how the Hanged Man is very, very fucking timely, because we are working with Bat this month in Patreon, and also Bat does show up very commonly in the Hanged Man. We will discuss that in Animals in Tarot for any Patreons who are watching this, like, ooh. But what I realised very quickly, as is often the case when an animal sort of comes through to me or I choose it for the month, is that there's definitely a message there for me, as well as more of like how I try as best I can to tap into some form of collective energy, that this is an invitation in how I'm feeling, responding, taking in how I perceive this. So that's how I look at those two together, and the distraction was actually just the purple, violets, indigos that were coming through on these two. So I just wanted to add that as well. So next up we have a returner from the summer edit, and that is the Mind's Eye Tarot, which I did say gave me late summer vibes anyway, as one of my friends brought to my attention, and I was very much in agreement. And then we've got the Oracle of Oddities, which I removed just a handful of cards from the top just so that they were even, and duality came up, and I was looking at how the blues and the reds were showing up on one side of the duality. And then actually, is this a bat and a snake? It is. Interesting, because I think of the snake as the coil, like, and the idea of being constricted by something. Not to demonize the snake, we're just using them in this way in this instance. So that's really interesting. And the bat also being sort of like the nocturnal representation of, if you want to get out of the Eight of Swords, it's really asking you to perhaps rely on some of the other senses or a different perspective beyond where we're at the moment. So I didn't set these up in this way on purpose, and then immediately really love them together, which is a good feeling, because I have been using this before with another of Claire's decks, Compendium of Constellations. I just had to lean my head down and check. So this is the Oracle of Oddities 1, 2 and 3. One of the reasons that I said I picked the Memento for the last deck specifically to do with these two is, while I could use the Memento with this one, I am really particular about what I use that with, being a more expansive reflection of my practice and some of the ways that I work with it. It's not to say that I couldn't, I just don't foresee it being as much, this tarot, sorry, as much a deck that I would use with a Memento. This feels just a little bit more general to me. And the Oracle of Oddities feels like it traverses that a bit more as well. Again, that perhaps is my relationship with it more than anything else, but these two are just slightly a bit more chill than the Memento. And also on a sillier but fun level, the Oracle of Oddities utilises colour a lot more. So aside from some of the Patreon cards in Memento, like the elemental ones, I think the God and Goddess, I don't have those yet, and a couple of others, most of them are the green, the white and the black. Well, this has quite strong colour associations throughout the cards, although one colour or two tend to dominate. And because I love colour, as we already know, it just felt like these would be a better fit all around. Energetically, aesthetically, all of the things. You're probably looking at them saying they're not an aesthetic fit anyway, but for me they are. And because I've already used this one with one of Claire's other decks, I trust that the transition between the two is going to be great. I stopped because this says embrace, but what caught my eye between the Seven of Pentacles and this card was actually the transitional sort of, I guess, commentary between the caterpillar and the butterfly, because it takes a while to get there. I was talking to someone about the Seven of Pentacles the other day, and that really sticking at something, that's one of the hardest parts in this card sometimes, is trusting the process even when it's not going how you wanted right that second, or it's not reaping the exact sort of rewards that you're looking for. Of course, if everything was going to shit, that would be different, but that really wasn't the context of why the card came up. And the card meaning in and of itself has that reflection on, well, I've already done so much in this. Do I really want to burn it all to the floor? Or is this something that I can push forward with and maybe even make a few adaptations, sure, but move from the caterpillar to the butterfly? It sort of speaks to that to me. So that was the first thing that I noticed between those. And sometimes that's the way it is for me. It's not even the word was embrace, and I suppose, did I say embrace that? I'm liking these two together. As I say, they're both decks that I've used, just not together yet, which will be interesting. That's probably something to note about this particular seasonal edit. It's a little bit more experimental in that way. I'm trying not to just harp on about every little detail I see between the two of them. But I mean, come on, explore for the Page of Wands. And just the idea of their feet almost burning up with anticipation of wanting to get out there and do something, you know, like this sitting around business is just not for the Page of Wands. Come on, let's do this. Dreams for the Ten of Cups, yes please. This up here, dreaming and fantasy ideals, but also emotional nourishment and how that shows up in the way that I'm thinking and how I'm communicating, pulling in this sort of very brain aspect. That's how the Ten of Cups feels to me, because it often has this familial or romantic pairing, and I'll be honest, I kind of glaze over that unless it feels really relevant to the reading. But if someone said to me Ten of Cups, I might add the heart as more of a representation between emotion into intuition, but I feel like, yeah, that it would be on its way there, you know, watering the seeds that come all the way up and bloom. I should probably stop and get onto the last deck, which is on its own. So we have our final deck. It's not to say that I won't pair it with some of the oracles that I've got, but I don't actually know if I will or not. There's quite a lot to dive into in the imagery in this, and again, it's another one I have zero familiarity with. My friend kindly gifted it to me for my birthday. There's something about this one in particular. I feel like if it doesn't have an oracle with it, I probably won't really mind for the time being. The name of this deck does make me want to burst into song, but I will not. It's called Every Little Thing You Do Is Magic. Is that right? I checked because I thought I was misremembering, based on the fact that, again, I really wanted to sing If You Know, You Know. Now, let's shift it over a bit just so we can see. So yeah, I'm not going to be discussing pairings, but that's not an issue. And also, this deck is an absolute beastie. It is particularly difficult for me to shuffle, but not out of the realms of possibility. Even though the cardstock is lovely and bendy and a lot thinner than some of the others this size. So I have been shuffling this long ways and just getting a feel for it, really. So again, not acquainted, haven't had it very long, but I really enjoy the contrast between the photography and then the drawn layers, which, as you can see, occasionally does shift. I feel like predominantly the photography's behind solely, and we've got the drawn layers on top, but this Nine of Swords and a couple of others does do it differently. I don't actually find that too jarring. The animal layers speak to me quite a lot. I'm very fond of the contrast between the two styles, I suppose, and that's probably of no surprise because of the lovely Peculiar Pathways Tarot. This is a card that almost had me in tears the first time I saw it, which I'm glad that I was doing that on my own, because it really reminds me of one of my leopard geckos who's no longer with us. She would have rocked the King of Wands, absolutely rocked it for an energy. Her name was 𝗪𝗲𝗯. There's a lot of feels there, but in a great way as well, like the fact that an animal that's so dear to me as a species, but not commonly indexed, showing up in one like this. I just really love that. I also feel like, as far as renames of the courts go, which this does, it does them in quite an intuitive way for someone who is, like I said again, already familiar. And so apprentice, page, oracle, queen, and then champion, knight. Let me know what you think about the renames, because I am curious. And as for my late summer transitional deck selection, these are the 13 that are going to be out and predominantly on my table. So I'm excited to get into them and have a little go and see what happens. I haven't done monthly practice videos very much at all this year, and I've been toying with it. It depends on energy as well. We'll see. Anyway, thank you for hanging out, and I will see you all again soon. Bye.